One, and we are recording on Monday, August 18th, 2025 at 11:03 a.m. Eastern Time with Mr. Pedro Israel Orta. And I was just, oh, and guys, please go check out the sponsor of the show, International Gladiator Beverage. It's caffeine. It's nothing more than that. You need caffeine. I need it. Go support the show. Use the link in the description. We were just talking, and you texted me earlier and said, "Is it formal?" And then I was like, "No, I normally come from the gym sometimes." But as I was just telling you, whenever it's kind of intelligence community, military or doctors, kind of that just general a professional air. I always throw on like a collared shirt or something just to not look like a total slob. But I texted you, I said no, a lot of times I come in a gym shirt, and then that went in one ear and out the other, and then I went and put on a collared shirt, and then you come in and you're in a gym. I was like, oh shit, I make this guy look bad. So I went and threw back on my smelly gym shirt. So at least we are kindred in that sense. And exactly freedom. Yeah. So yeah, no, that's so I stand by that. It is a laid back show, and your show broke or not your show, excuse me, your book Broken Whistle. The link is in the description. But let's just go on what you were just saying because you said you have a shoulder issue, and it was preceded or caused predominantly by really your time in the agency and the places around the world, and how that has touched you to this day. So, Mr. Orta, take it away.
Thank you, Tommy, for being so gracious having me on your show
Yes,
today.
sir.
So yeah, I've got a flare up of a right shoulder issue. And I mean, what most people don't realize is if you actually work in war zones or in some of these austere environments, I mean, you are exposed to all type of environmental hazards. Also, on top of that, factor in the extreme stress of the duress of working 80 hours, 100 hours each week, being on call 24/7, sleep deprived. You're also working, and in some cases, depending on what kind of deployment you're doing, you are working for not weeks, but months without a day off. Several times in my agency career, I worked for 4 months straight without a day off, 80 plus hours a week. And in some of these environments, the environmental toxins, the stresses have physical impacts. And, I did 2 years in Iraq under these circumstances. I did 2 years in another semi-war zone, just wrecking my body. Uh, Followed up by a year in Afghanistan. And it was in that year in Afghanistan in 2010 where I had a really bad urinary tract infection. And I had to take ciprofloxacin for basically I believe it was 2 months.
Oof.
Ciprofloxacin, most people don't realize, has a black box label warning. I didn't know it at the time. It actually is a neurotoxin because it is a synthetic, man-made antibiotic strain that contains natural elements and man-made elements. They infuse it with fluoride. That's why it's called fluoroquinolone, and that is a neurotoxin. And ultimately, what will happen is my body became so intoxicated by this antibiotic that I could no longer tolerate it. But sadly, there's only one way to find out. It is by taking it again. So I took it a second time for that urinary tract infection that popped up again in 2011. And I had an immediate reaction that affected multiple tendons, neurological dysfunctions. And, based on medical opinions, not my own, the one doctor told me, yeah, you've had damage by a fluorocone antibiotic, ciprofloxacin. And it was an athletic doctor. And there are athletes that will not touch fluoroquinolone antibiotics because
Oh,
in
really?
most cases they're prone to affect the Achilles tendon. That's the most common, but it can affect multiple other tendons. So yeah, I had some damage caused to my body, medically proven through blood tests as well, and it's in my book. So these are ailments that I suffer as a direct result of my service in war zones. And I'm gonna go get it checked out today and just take it from there.
In terms of, and I'm gonna make a note to get you back on here for your book. Um, but in terms of like that, I don't forget who said the quote or what the quote is exactly, but it's like suffering without purpose is hell. in the sense that you can suffer towards something that's worthwhile. I mean, in college, I was pre-med. I got into medical school. That's probably still my proudest achievement. And it would you can't redline it all the time, right? Because a lot of these things are marathons. But there are moments where you can redline it. You know, the last Friday in finals week. It's like you stay up all night and study. It's worth it. You get the whole Christmas break. You can sleep in. Now you can't make that a habit and do that every day because you'll crash and burn. And if it's, let's say, just being pre-med, that's a 4 year block. You can't do that every day. If the podcast is almost 6 years old, you can't redline it every day. You gotta keep a high tempo, but you also got to know when to relax. There are, I guess, redline moments where, maybe it's a huge thing in the news, like when they tried to blow Trump's head off last summer. It was like late in the day, and I called my buddy Dale. Dale's in Delta Force CIA ground branch, and I was like, I got to get the show on. Like, you got to go out because the podcast is also a business. Like, I got to go get views. There are things, or maybe sometimes multiple huge guests line up, like the stars align, and you just, Mike Lindell, Roseanne Barr, an Apollo astronaut, and you're like, I have to do all of these. These are killer guests. You get 2 hours of sleep, but it's almost not bad because there's a purpose to it. It's my business. I'm growing it. This is gonna be great. I'm gonna have those in my resume forever. You can catch up on sleep. But when you're doing it nonstop around the clock, and if it's not something for that's 100% you understand the purpose of, or you believe in the purpose of, it very quickly turns into hell. So today's Monday, right? If tonight I don't sleep that well, tomorrow there's gonna be no adrenaline pushing me through tomorrow. It's tomorrow will be episode 1814. There's no real like red alert that I need that show. And so it's gonna be miserable. If it is just a huge thing, it sort of pulls you through it. For something like that, 80-hour weeks every single day. I mean, I can do a podcast every day. About 15 days I've learned is the max, and I've done 1,800 of them. You start to burn out. And there are physical, you'll get aches and pains. And you're like, how am I achy? I sit in a chair and do episodes. The cortisol release, the adrenaline release, you'll get cramps in your calves, or you'll get a pain in your abs, or I've pulled my neck and it's only because I've been doing shows or something. So that's got to tie into, now I guess the zillion-dollar question is that was something you truly believed in. So did that help? I don't know if gloss over is the right term. Did that help give you that sort of push, that finals week feeling of you're in the agency, you're in a war zone, you're not at Office Depot. Like that's pretty cool. That's a sexy thing. Did you get that? Or even if you did get that, does that eventually kind of run out of fuel when you're doing that for months on end and you have this antibiotic that's tearing you up? How does that all wash out?
Well, a couple things. You learn how to manage your body, your mental discipline, your disposition, your attitude. You divide your day up. For example, one of the most common things to do was to divide the day in two. Try to take a break sometime in the late afternoon hours and go to the gym. Get a workout in. Kind of break free from it if you could, and then get back into it again. Try to, if the tempo allowed for you to maybe take a longer break, you would. If you have an opportunity to catch up on some sleep, you would. Although there were instances in which that was interrupted and you had no choice but to jump into action.
Sure.
So you learn how to manage the environment, your body. Food was critical. You got to ensure that you were getting the right kind of nutrition, that you stay hydrated. So little techniques of high performance physical, management. It's kind of similar to people look at Tom Brady and wonder in amazement, how could he do it for so long?
Yeah.
Well, he's got his book, I think TB12 is the book, and he gets into not just the dynamics of his physical training that he started to tailor for years down the road as his body aged, but there are also aspects of nutrition, what to eat, what not to eat, when to eat it, when not to eat it. So you learn these little ways to manage yourself so that you can continue to perform at a high level. However, you're right. You are constantly redlining it. And it's like if you redline an engine, you got that engine on a red line, it's going to wear out gears. It's going to wear out, you know, pistons, all the mechanical different functions. So it's going to do some damage to your body. And, you may have to live with it for the rest of your life. I mean, I know older agency officers who became like contractors. I mean, they wrecked their bodies through their agency career, so their health was suffering later in life. Diabetes, high blood pressure, certain other type of ailments. So, I mean, at a certain point in time, what you do is you're going to have to pull back.
Yeah.
And if you can, I do remember one time where back in 2010, our chief of base came back from a chief of base seminar or a chief of station seminar they had for the region. And he said everybody there looked just bone tired
Hmm.
because, I mean, these were leaders that were constantly deploying into these war zone environments. And the fatigue was there. I saw it in the early 2010s, where leaders who had been constantly on the go since the initial invasion of Iraq 2003 through all that happened, not just Iraq, but then Afghanistan, and consequently the surge in Afghanistan in 2010. A lot of these leaders that were constantly deploying out were basically just tired. And they began to retire in, the probably the mid 2010s. Or for that matter, some of them said, I'm done with war zones. They try to either take a rotation like the ODNI, Director of National
Hmm.
Intelligence, or try to find some headquarters job as much as they may have disliked working headquarters, but their bodies couldn't take it anymore. And sadly, that was causing problems to get qualified leaders to go out into war zones. And they started making mandatory. If you're going to be eligible for promotion, you're going to have to serve out in a war zone. So they were sending out people into war zones that honestly were not qualified, couldn't handle the environment. And that's where I run into problems in 2014, 2015 with just absolute, just feckless management. I mean, if you were to contrast the management team I had in Iraq in 2014, 2015 with the management team that I had in Iraq in 2004 to 2006, it's a night and day difference. And I mean drastic night and day difference. So consequently, you can only push people so far before either their bodies begin to break down or they have the wisdom to pull the plug on it and say, no mas.
Hmm. Yeah, I can. I mean, I've yeah, I've interviewed some Delta Force guys. And I was watching a video not that long ago, and it was an ex-Delta Force guy, and he was talking about just how like high speed it was. It was like being in the Olympics, and they're like, "Are there lasting effects?" And he was like, "Oh yeah." He's like, "My body's broken," and they go, "Was it worth it?" And he goes, "Yeah, it's what I always wanted to do." So I also get that sense of like, it'd be like, I'm sure Tom Brady has aches and pains. But if you asked him, is it worth it? He'd be like, of course. 10 Super Bowls, 7 wins. He's like, dude, yes. Like, I get that. But then there's also got to be that medium line of not, well, especially if it's not needed. Like, I get having them out there, right? You don't want guys who are completely detached from the war zone. You want them to know, like deaths aren't just things on paper, it's real. But there's also seemingly, there would be no value in putting Bill Belichick on the field. It's like you're gonna beat this guy. It's like his whole thing is his brain. Like there's no sure it's a good story. We put him on the field so he knows what it's like to get hit. But if the big picture is to run an organization, run a franchise, and win and make money, if there's you don't really want to do that. It'd be stupid. If anyone did that, you'd be like, why are you doing that? Like, I don't want that. I don't, if I own stock in Tesla or Amazon, yeah, I get it's a feel good story to have Bezos in the warehouse sweating or Elon's on the assembly line. Okay, but if my goal is to make I don't really I want them to do what they do. So that is an interesting thing of putting people in there seemingly for the sake of putting them in there, which doesn't seem to be in my 35-year-old completely unexperienced who I have a biology degree. I have no experience in any of this. But that seems to be kind of stupid to put them in there just to put them in there. And then you have guys who their whole thing was they were going to work at a desk, and now you've broken them to the point where they have a natural ceiling to how many more years they can give you. And as in most things, the later years are the most valuable for them in terms of being an asset, being an intelligence analyst. They're good. They've been around the block a couple times. That kind of seems like perhaps a symptom of a larger, I guess, ailment of bureaucracy of putting people in a war zone for the sake of having them in the war zone. So it's not, in your experience, it's not across the board like a good thing to do that.
Not at all. And consequently, that's why they were having quite a bit of psychological issues in war
Sure.
zones. And it got to the point that the Office of Medical Service would have psychologists and psychiatrists who would go out to these war zones. And I still remember to this day in the room where I was listening to one of the high-level officers in the Office of Medical Services bragging about how they can prescribe drugs, mental drugs, to people that were mentally distressed in war zones. I mean, this is serious. I mean, your weakest link is your weakest officer.
Yeah.
And on that note, there was a case of one officer in Kabul, Afghanistan, that was mentally distressed. This officer was so mentally distressed that the supervisor had recommended this officer needs to go home. This person is not handling this out here very well. Well, they overrode him, the supervisor. And this person that was having mental issues was a woman. And sadly, she was down to her last weeks. And in those last weeks, well, guess what? You're in a war zone. You have weapons. You're issued weapons. Took the weapon and shot themselves with it and killed themselves. An actual suicide in a war zone because we had a mentally distressed officer out there who couldn't handle it, shouldn't have been out there, but they were trying to force people to work in this environment. And this is something that's publicly out there. There's a Washington Post article by Ian Shapira, and you can read it for yourself. So I'm not disclosing anything that's classified or anything that shouldn't be aired publicly. It's just the truth.
Yeah, and there's once you hit that level of stress, because up until then, I would imagine, just purely hypothetical, I would imagine that's part of the thing is everyone's burned out, but you push them through. Work harder, go harder. You hit a point where that happens, then it's no longer, push harder. Now it's deleterious. Quite literally, it's deleterious. Well, you've lost someone that also, hey, people in there knew her, were friends with her. You're now adding, that's not really a good sales pitch either to potential candidates. Like, hey, if you're not doing well, you have your out is a gun, not a trip home. A trip home to where you could decompress, get help, and probably still be a very effective analyst at a desk stateside. Like it's not it seems to be an inhuman aspect of it. And yeah, I guess to play devil's advocate on the other side, you could say like, yeah, it's a war zone. This is another fatality. This is part of it. I I don't know. Uh, it doesn't seem it doesn't seem like a good way to go about it.
Now, I got 2 points to interject here.
Yeah.
When I was in Iraq in 2004, 2006, I really had a superb management team who knew how to manage the environment, the personnel. I recall one specific GS-15 high-level officer who was put in charge of a base, and this base would frequently get bombarded by either mortars or rockets, mostly mortars. And if you've ever been subjected to a mortar attack or a rocket attack, it can be very jarring. I'm talking about, we could be sitting here and all of a sudden, kaboom, and things shake, depending on how far away it is. Well, this senior officer couldn't handle it. So, how did they handle this? Easy. Okay. He's not able to handle the rocket attacks. Let's put him in a position in the war zone where the ability for him to be impacted by these rockets is diminished, but yet we are able to put him in a place where he can function and perform and contribute to the mission. So they recalled him back to Baghdad and put him in charge of a department in Baghdad where he was spectacular. Now, I mean, that's how you solve this. Now, on treating patients, call them patients because that's what we all become when our bodies become distressed and suffer consequences. Given what happened to me physically from Iraq, another war zone, and Afghanistan, literally that was, I mean, 5 plus years of war zone, and add on that 6 months of intense training. I had some physical ailments to deal with, and I went to see a doctor who noticed that my hormone levels were completely whacked, cortisol up the roof, this and that. And the answer to it was you're going to need to get some hormone supplementation to try to get your hormones back in sync. The natural supplements that I can take and some supplements that I can, creams that I can put on my body, natural remedies that are used effectively in the medical world. Not necessarily most medical practitioners, but the holistic doctors, the chiropractor doctors, the DO medical doctors will do these kind of treatments to try to get people's bodies to get back in synchronization, get their hormone levels back to normal. Well, I had to go through my re-examination physically at the CIA, and I reported it as I should because I'm not supposed to lie. I need to be truthful. They had a fit. I'm talking about a complete fit. It's like, how dare you take these steroids? I was not injecting steroids. I was using creams on my body. And, the chief psychologist interviewed me as part of the process to get my TDY, ability to travel clearance. And, basically, ripped it apart and said they should have put me on psychiatric medicines. That was the response. And it's like, no, thank you. I don't need to take psychiatric medicines. I think I will trust my personal private physician. But at that point, the entire bureaucracy got into cover-up mode as to try to cover up its, damaging things done to personnel through all these exposures and environmental toxins and so forth. And it's like they had no interest really in treating the patient. It was more a protect the bureaucracy versus take care of the patient.
On the flip side, is there any part of that high? I mean, we've been talking about all the negatives, but is there any part of that kind of you're talking about you get a free moment, go break the routine, go get in the gym if you can catch up on sleep. Was there any part of that you liked? Like for instance, when I do podcasts, I don't really like to do one a day. Sometimes I just find myself I'm scheduling a couple a day and I have meetings and on paper I go, I don't want to do this. This is a long week. But there is something about waking up and just immediately, like, I don't have time to get on my phone and scroll Instagram. Get up, go to the gym, come back, shower, show one, show two, meeting, show three. There is something, I don't know what, stimulating about it's kind of nice not having any time to waste. There's no like I'll go sit on the toilet for 30 minutes. Like you're like I gotta go. I gotta do this. I gotta do that. I gotta, and you go. And then at the end of the day, it's when you sit down, you unwind. The unwinding feels 10 times better than normal because you've been going so hard. But it's a sweet spot. There's something about just not having any time to waste. So you just gotta go. There's no, I'm late, you're late to work. I gotta hit this, gotta hit that. You don't sit at the stoplight. Am I gonna? You're like, I gotta find a shortcut. There is something, and maybe I'm just a crazy person who likes it, but there is something about the selection pressures that is seductive. Now, if you do it nonstop, that very same seduction can become torment, and then you start not getting enough sleep, and then you start actually performing poorly, and then it is no longer subjectively enjoyable, and it's not even objectively worth it. If you start looking at the stats, you're like, you're not even doing good work anymore. So it can crumble. But that being said, is there any part of you that does just that you liked it? Was there any part of those just busy where you don't have any time to what? You I got to do this. As soon as this is over, I'm catching a nap, and I wake up from the nap, and I got to do X. Is there any part of you that liked that or misses that, or was that overshadowed?
Absolutely. What happens here is you're working in a high impact environment where you see immediate fruit to your work.
Yeah.
And in some cases on a daily basis, multiple successes. I compared one office back at CIA headquarters to imagine a potted plant and the effects a potted plant has on the air. Turns carbon
Mm.
dioxide into oxygen. There was one particular office where, honestly, we would have been better off if we replaced people with plants to filter the putrid air in that basement to turn the carbon dioxide to oxygen because it was just busy work. And in some cases, there was no work. We had people literally that would plan a trip, go overseas, write an agency cable, send it back to CI headquarters. They would fly back to that office, work on what needed to be done to answer that cable to meet that tasking. Nuts,
Yeah.
seriously. But now in these war zones, you are put in an environment where life and death, you had to perform. So what happens is you have immediate payoff. You're having impact. You're generating operations, taking down bad guys, contributing to, collecting very important intelligence that makes it into a president's daily brief that has an impact on not just necessarily your small little sphere of influence, but the nation you're working in, and for that matter, policy being set back in Washington. So there are significant trade-offs to counter, figure out with the type of work you do in these high tempo environments to just a mundane bureaucratic job at CIA headquarters. And one third component I might as well add here is you had to be very careful. We had to be very careful. Everyone had to be very careful that you don't become an adrenaline junkie and get hooked into
Yeah.
that adrenaline and be always in an adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
That was something you had to really protect yourself, and that's where you had to try to divide your day, try to pace yourself if you can. But absolutely, I mean, we were all doing, for the most part, critical work in these hostile environments with significant, fruit benefits, impact immediately seen.
Yeah, I'll find that sometimes where I'll just be banging it hard every day. Just is because it's a one man operation. I'm the producer, the thumbnail, the outreach, it's just me. And it's sometimes you're just rolling and then by the time you're finally finished with the day, you are so naturally tired. You don't need a Xanax or a beer. You just conk out for 12 hours and you wake up and you hit it again. And I have had the issue though of like where I'll reach a Friday afternoon and I'll finish the last show. It's been a long week, and I'll almost start to get slightly almost existential. Like, what am I doing? What am I doing? And I find myself, I'm like, I wish I had more work. And I always try to note that. I'm like, that I would rather want more as just as a personality trait or flaw. I'd rather want more work and have to pace myself than be someone who just hated work. I feel like that would be a very tough way to go through life. But I've noticed that sometimes where I'll be like, well, I wish I had more work. And it's like, well, what else are you missing? How much time have you maybe not taken for like what other voids in my life am I filling up? I've been sober a year and a half, so I can't even do that anymore. But I'll be like, it's been a couple months since I went and visited my parents. So I'll be like, when's the last time I've just like played some video games with my best friends and just laughed for the sake of laughing? Or every morning I wake up, the first thing I do is I press play on an audiobook. I try to listen to an hour of an audiobook a day just to always be learning. I'm like, sometimes it's okay to just wake up and, on a Saturday, just shuffle upstairs and not go to the gym. And for me, I go, well, how come I'm not okay with that? And that's where meditation comes in. That's where prayer comes in, where it's like it's good to work and it's good to rise to the occasion of work. But it's not good if you're uneasy with silence. And I don't mean like solitary confinement. I mean you shouldn't freak out because you have a Saturday without any work. You should sit back and go, man, it is a beautiful August. Like that's good. And I could definitely see, I totally get the adrenaline junkie thing. I totally see. I think wasn't that a lot of World War II, like Marines didn't they weren't they the backbone of a lot of biker gangs? Because they're like, I need like you were storming caves in Okinawa with a flamethrower. You're like, I can't go work at Sears. Like I gotta, it's whatever it is, and it's just it's selling drugs or weapons. Not even so much to do it because they were just like, I need a feel. Like I could see the flip side of that. So I don't know. This has been a bit a split brain podcast talking about how bad it is, but then also like you yearn for it. So I guess I could wrap it into a bigger question is so in college, my first 2 years, I went to Valdosta State University before I transferred to the University of Georgia. Not important. I was in a fraternity my first year, and it's fun, crazy. You party, you gain 20 pounds, you lose all your money, whatever. The second year, I kind of got more into studying and trying to get my GPA up. In that second year, you start to have this sort of friction with the fraternity because you are still in it. You live in the frat house, but you are now more focused on, I want to get good grades because you're now going, okay, it's 3 years till we graduate. Like that's right around the corner. And you have all these issues with the fraternity. You wish they didn't party so hard. You wish they weren't so loud. And eventually it dawns on you that that's what the fraternity is, and it's you that needs to move on. And you're not in the wrong, and they're not in the wrong. You're just not meant to be together. And then you transfer, and that's what I did. But it took me a long time to realize, like, I'm trying to fix something that doesn't need fixing. It is supposed to be full of 19-year-olds who can't handle alcohol, chasing women. Like, that's what it's supposed to be. Is there, is this maybe the intelligence community or the military at large that by the time you hit this realization that you're redlining it too much, you're doing too much, it's time you maybe back out and a bunch of young dudes are coming in who are chomping at the bit for those 80-hour weeks. And you go, oh, it's always been that. It's probably been that since World War One, and you just need to bow out. I don't really know where I was going with that whole ramble, but
Well, this brings up an excellent point, and you find this predominantly in law enforcement environments. You have certain law enforcement officers who end up taking deep cover jobs to infiltrate criminal elements, and they literally become almost like a criminal and live that lifestyle.
sure.
And what happens here is, at a certain point in time, they need to be pulled out so that, they don't become a criminal,
Mm,
or the effects of being part of a criminal element does not rewire them to a point
to
that go past a point of no return. So some of these law enforcement entities, local polices, state polices, some of the federal ones, for example, I believe DEA may be one, that they will pull an officer back and just completely relocate them and send them somewhere else safe where they can rehabilitate so that they don't cross those lines and become a criminal or be so affected negatively that it just destroys their families, their psyche, and their ability to function in society. Sadly, what happens is in the US military and in the CIA, they for the most part, they don't do that. They just keep pushing people until they either break them, burn them out, or they quit. Or for that matter, they may do some harm that gets them legally into trouble. But
sure.
in the case of the CIA, what happens is you have officers that basically their brains gets completely rewired, and now this criminal psychopathy is psychopathy is the correct word, becomes part of their nature. So they become basically narcissistic, toxic managers that begin to utilize, tradecraft against their employees and their managers, managing upward and managing downward. They're complete psychopaths. They really have no place to be a leader or a manager, but yet because they're so good at what they do, they put them into leadership positions. This is why, there are a lot of chiefs of stations who are total jackasses.
Yeah.
And most people will tell you, don't work for that chief of station. That guy is just a psychotic nuthead. And I encountered those type of people where it's like if I can run and not work for them, I would avoid them at all cost. but you're working for a bureaucracy. And sometimes you have no choice but to work for some of these people. And hopefully you're able to survive that tour. And you don't always survive it. There have been countless good officers, the CIA, who had their careers completely ruined because they worked for a psychotic, psychopathic manager that had no reason whatsoever to be put in charge, but were put in charge because they were deemed too good for what they do. On this note, I found myself in a room with about a dozen people. We were sitting down talking to the number three at the CIA. One officer had the audacity to ask the question. We know that there are some really bad managers, psychopathic managers working in the director of operations, but why do you put them in charge? The answer we got back was because they're good at what they do. So they rather put in a bad psychotic manager in charge that potentially can damage people below them because they're good at what they do. And I'll close it here with one more comment on this topic. The acting IG for the Office of Inspector General for the Intelligence Community, when I met with this person one-on-one, when I was being sent back to CIA, I mean, he just point blank said, "We know who you work for." And he pointed out there is no doubt that some really bad people at the CIA did some bad things to you. And
Mm,
sadly, what happens here is bad people are put in positions of power, but those above them cover for them, like this number three. So they get away with these things. And some of these things can be potentially criminal actions if you start getting into conspiracy against rights. We're talking about violations of the Title VII Act of the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, where if they're absolutely trying to kill an EEO complaint that it's legitimate based on a federally protected category, these could be criminal actions, not just civil actions, violations of law.
for a lot of those, I don't know the specifics. I know my not my uncle. I know my mom's cousin was in the DEA for FBI DEA forever, and that was eventually no, they did that was witness protection, I think. So I think that's different. His father, my grandfather's brother, 18 years old on D-Day, survived, came back, did 50 years in the FBI because he just wanted to keep serving. That's just, great American. I definitely can see how you get lost in the sauce. You're either undercover. I've had like undercover ATF guys. You either become so jaded, or you might start to look at them and be like, "Man, they're making a killing. Well, how come I'm not doing this?" And it's starting. You build a tolerance, and you go, "The money's gonna move hands no matter what. How come I don't get it?" Like, and it's not right, but I can see how it would happen for some things. And the answer might be no. I have no idea. But for some things, I can almost imagine you would want that slow psychopathy to develop. And by that, I mean trauma surgeons or pediatric surgeons. You often hear that surgeons are just assholes. I'm sure. Okay, probably. But you also don't want someone who freaks out when they see a kid come in and they're bleeding out. I would lose my mind, right? I wouldn't. My mom was a nurse for 30, 40 years. I'm sure she would still lose her mind. At a certain point, though, when you have the guy, you want a guy who is maybe he's cold and calculated, maybe he's a legitimate psychopath, but you want someone who's not flustered. When the plane starts going through turbulence, all the passengers are freaking out, but you want that pilot who's done 50,000 hours and his heart rate's not even going up a little bit. I could imagine for something like Delta Force or CIA undercover operations, you might, and it's a tightrope to walk. You might want someone who has been completely hollowed out, looked into the void and the void looked back. You might want them to do that job, and in a dark way, you might even be able to calculate it and go, I know they've done criminal things, but the net good is better. I can also see though how this logic is it can walk you down a path of 50 years later you're in a dictatorship and you're like, well, we all thought we were doing the right thing. And so I get how that's flawed. But are there any things or is that reserved to, I don't know, trauma surgeons where you want someone who doesn't free like EMTs aren't psychopaths, but they gotta come up, roll up to a car crash, and it might be a dude with a busted lip. It might be a car with four dead kids and one alive, and they gotta triage the one kid. You don't really want them freaking. Now the human element, yeah, I mean it traumatizes them, and I'm not even approaching that. Just to play devil's advocate, is there any aspect of the agent, where it's the agency, it's the CIA? I mean, those are the top dogs where you want somebody who's just a psycho, or and is the logic, if we don't employ them, we're going to be going against them, and I'd rather have them on our. Is there any, or am I? Do I sound like the a PR representative for a dictator at like a human rights trial?
Many different ways this question can be answered. I mean, one specific case is look at football. You have coaches and players. Some coaches are phenomenal coaches, but they were terrible players. But yet
Yeah.
they're able to coach and turn out championship teams. Some players were phenomenal players, champion players, and won championships, but they flop as coaches. So the point here is you just cannot put somebody in charge because they were good at what they were doing as a player. On that note, there's an aspect of talent evaluation here. And how do you evaluate that talent? It is a serious question that plagues government. And that's one of the things that Stuart Scheller is working on now for the Department of Defense. How can we ensure that we promote and put in positions of, power, leadership, the best leaders possible? And that is just an enduring question that psychologists, the high performance people who evaluate these issues will debate for ages. Uh, Here, one more thing that needs to be taken into account. There's an element of just the individual just having that moral fiber, moral fortitude, that inner strength to be able to handle difficult situations. Doesn't mean you have to numb yourself emotionally. One example I can give you here is years ago, there was a BBC series called MI5, a really great series on the British internal security, the equivalent of the US FBI. Very realistic. I kept up with seasons one, two, and three, but post season three, I can't vouch for it, but I can speak for seasons one, two, and three. Superb. And in one of these episodes, they had a situation where the MI5 agents, were kidnapped. And now the leader was in a hostage negotiation session with the kidnappers. And the kidnappers had, I believe it was like three of their officers, and actually shot one in the head and killed him. So obviously the two others were very distressed. And one of the individuals was a lady, and the lady was almost hysterical. But here you had the leader of MI5 just absolutely just telling her, keep your head. We can grieve about this later. You got to stay with me. We're going to get through this. Keep your head, work your way through this. Don't mentally crack. This is the wrong time to crack. That's the point right there. You have to be able to handle an extreme instance of something that can just shock you and keep your mental faculties together, your moral fiber together to be able to walk that straight line and do what is right.
Mm. No, I can see that. I mean, I see it with this podcast with just times in which it seems like everything's fallen out from under it with no heads. You always expect certain things of shows are doing better or worse, or views across all podcasts spike around presidential elections. And then hey, these are things you kind of okay, got it, get it, got it, good. But there have been moments where you know I've built it just for reference. Like I've truly built this thing up from nothing. It was just me, and it took forever to get to a point where I could even pay my rent, which was like the coolest milestone ever. But there was a point last year where I don't know, like 70% of my income was from one kind of podcast network. No warning, no heads up, no nothing, just cut one morning. No severance, nothing. They didn't honor the contract. I don't have a lawyer. I can't afford a lawyer, so it's not like I could get the last couple months out of them. And I'm like an anxious person. Like I and And that's part of what I think has driven me to do well in endeavors, but it's also a downside. And the weirdest thing happened was I remember when that happened, I was on the treadmill and part of my brain went, oh, this is something to completely freak out about. And another part of me just went, I gotta finish this workout. I have a guest in 35 minutes. It's Tuesday. I still have a long work week ahead of me. I'm not out on the street. I have enough money to pay a couple months rent. Focus. And I just kept waiting for the panic to come. Almost like you see the explosion and you know the shockwave's coming and it's gonna break all the windows. You see those videos on YouTube where you're like you find yourself telling you're like get down, the windows are gonna break. And it never came. And because of that, I was able to soberly navigate instead of losing my mind. I just went like, okay, realistically, okay, I still have this whole podcast library. I have all these Rolodex. I'm still making some money. I have a couple months that I can pay out of pocket. Where can I go? And it took a couple weeks. And it's not like, oh, well, the next day I found employment. It took a couple weeks, but I slowly kind of brought the ship back to the center and then kept going. And every once in a while, I'll look back at it and think of it and get like a little shake. But it wasn't just a good thing for the sake of being a good thing. It actually allowed me to rectify the situation. It's where it's not like you have a panic attack, you take a Xanax and it brings you down. Okay, but you're not really fixing the panic. And I get there's chronic anxiety and stuff, but you don't want that to be your go-to. And by not losing my mind and just by telling myself, I was like, I gotta finish this mile on the treadmill. I have another guest. I already got the thumbnail made. He's waiting for me. And it was just like completely saw the problem, noted it, noted the severity. That sucks. I'm gonna put that right there. I still have work to do. And by doing that, I was able to actually fix the very thing that was causing it. And I guess that would be a way of saying, like, yeah, you don't need a psychopath. You can just have somebody and it took me years of, freaking out to learn not to freak out. But I guess I'm kind of defeating my point. Yeah, you don't need a psychopath. That's just, you got to be able to, even getting banned from YouTube in 2021 for interviewing doctors talking about, I had on the Dr. Robert Malone, who has the patent for the mRNA vaccine. That was something where it was kind of scary, but I was still like, I think I'm doing the right thing, at the very least for free speech. Yeah, I guess from my own experience, if I can do it, yes, so can somebody else. So that nullifies my whole argument for needing a psychopath. You can develop those things on your own. So I think that's what you're saying. I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
anywhere close to it.
Now, one perfect example I have here is before I worked for CIA, I spent 14 years working in the Miami market, business environment, high stress, commodities market, perishable products. You had to deliver results. If you didn't deliver results, it could be catastrophic for businesses. I did it for the grocery industry as a produce buyer, fresh produce, buying fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, and so forth. Transferred over to the grocery side as far as being a representative for products out in the market, competitive market, lots of different companies competing for the same merchants. Followed it with some time in the floral industry, the floral import, fresh cut flowers. What I learned was in order to succeed in sales, you did not you did not have to be a lying SOB who cheated your customers, who lied to your customers, manipulated your customers to close the sales. You can learn how to service your customers, be, learn how to keep your word. We would actually do business in this environment by word of mouth and a shake of hands. We would, I would represent the company, they will represent their company. We would come to an agreement, we shake hands, turn backs, go our separate ways, and we each keep our word. My point is, you learn how to do business with integrity. You didn't have to be a lying SOB that cheated your customer, that burned bridges, destroyed relationships in the process. No, you actually built your business on integrity because now they can rely upon you and they will recommend you to other customers. Consequently, you would succeed through integrity instead of trying to be a one tour wonder or, having a short career that you're a wonder. You ended up having longevity. And through longevity, because of your integrity, you succeed. The same things apply in government and should be a criteria for these positions of power. You shouldn't be granted a position because you're a psychopath and you can get immediate results. You should be given a position because you can be entrusted to do the right thing and take care of not just the entity, but the employees below you. In many regards, what a lot of these psychopaths do is they're trying to take care of themselves, make themselves look good. They're stepping on people. They're basically creating a closet full of, bones in there, shall we say, skeletons that they have to constantly keep closed because if people find out the truth, they won't want anything to do with them. And this is why, in many cases, some of these high level intelligence officials who basically rose up the ranks by stepping over people, using people with these narcissistic, psychopathic tendencies, end up retiring quietly. You never hear about them.
And it's helpful to hear that because even doing this podcast, there's banner ads, which is like the little clicking thing that you'd see under a video. Then there's like pre-positioned ads, like Spotify does. I have no control over that. I have no idea if it's gonna be Whole Foods or IKEA. Like I don't, they use their algorithm and whatever, and and you get nothing. You get pennies per thousand. It's awful, but that's fine. Other things like sponsors, so like the energy drink sponsors, like I've had multiple different sponsors before and or opportunities to, and I've had to not do them because it just felt disingenuous. It felt slimy. Just tell your people this, tell your people that, tell your people you take this supplement, and I'm like, no, I've been working out for 25 years. Like, just tell them that you're taking this and this is how you got biceps. And I'm like, that's so dishonest. And now the carrot is like, man, if I did that, that would pay rent for the next year. The other side is okay, well, how many people who have painstakingly built up to become a show they watch that they can rely on is on 5 days a week? They know I'm gonna have, they know that it's, where else can you get you and I just kicking back and start with a shoulder injury and go from there? And you're gonna get them and you're gonna beat them over the head and they're gonna have a bad taste in their mouth and they go, that guy, he really hit 20. I thought Tommy was different. And now you lose that person, you can never get them back, and they're never gonna recommend you to anybody. Yeah, I have that a lot, and I'm actually happy you said that because even up till this morning, still trying to find like sponsors and advertisers for the show, and I'm always just struck into this middle place where I'm like, I think I could do this if I just had no soul. I'm like, I could pitch this. I could tell people you gotta have this, but I'm always looking at it, I'm like, I don't want to do it, and and so like caffeine. I use caffeine. I can honestly say, I'm like, yeah, get the energy drink. They're gonna sponsor the show. Yeah, I drink caffeine every day. I'm like, to me, that's honest. I get up, I have caffeine. Other stuff, I'm happy to hear you say that because I haven't found it yet. But I've the reason I've kept doing it is because, well, one, I don't want to be slimy, but two, I'm like, there's gotta be a way. There's no way every sales job ever in the history of man has been pure bullshit. Like there's gotta be genuine ways to do that. So I'm actually very grateful you said that because that's like my personal dilemma. I'm always like, I think I could. Like the cookie is there, nobody's around. I could take the cookies. Just like there's no way that doesn't have unintended consequences. So
I like to bring up one point here. Okay. To go to Afghanistan as a deputy chief of base, I had all these wonderful managers through the years train me as far as what to do, what not to do. But more importantly, we would do a seminar, we get additional training. And it went even further. We would meet with each individual leader for the division. And, we met with chief of operations, chief of intelligence, chief of personnel, chief of counterintelligence, chief of the area. And not just each individual meeting, but then in a group setting. And I was very clear to them that I would not abuse my position to mistreat people or mismanage people. I go out Now I'm found in a situation in which the chief of base cooked up false allegations against a subordinate, and they wanted me, as the deputy chief of base, to side with the chief of base, to lie about the subordinate, to take punitive actions against the subordinate. And I held my position. I will not be a false witness against this subordinate. He had done no wrong. We're in this problem because of the mismanagement of the COB. I told them what I would do before I went out there. I went out there when I was under pressure. I did what was right. And that's how I got myself into this mess. Had I been a complete jerk and hung an innocent man so I can step that career ladder, I would have completed my tour. I would have gotten a promotion. I would have had a cushy management job, potentially gone back out to the field as a chief of base. But I gave all that up, unfortunately, because they refused to acknowledge the wrong that they were trying to make me to do. They wanted me to become like them, to be one of them, to be basically a psychopathic leader who steps on people, ruins people's lives to climb the corporate ladder.
And we'll use this as like a pushing off point for our next show because I know you've written about it and kind of coming back to God, and we can do a whole nother show about that. But I'd say yeah, and then like above the whole unintended consequences, are people going to recommend your pod? Because if you're really cynical, you could be like, yeah, well, in 50 years, no one will know anyway, so why do I care what I do now? Okay. But when I look back at like why did I destroyed my show in 2021, banned from iTunes and YouTube, the two biggest purveyors of media. I was booted off them willingly while trying to make a business that runs on media. So not very intelligent, but I just was having on these doctors who helped invent the mRNA vaccine, and they're like, younger people shouldn't do this. And they're like, I've never seen this in my life. This isn't a normal thing, and no one's allowing us to talk. And I was just like, I don't feel good not doing, regardless of podcast, blah, blah, blah. I didn't feel good on what happens after this life when I got to go face the creator eye to eye. And he's like, yeah, I gave you this thing. It was a podcast. All you had to do is interview a couple of these guys and let them get the word out. And that would have, saved this person's life or that person's life. But by doing that, there is a different piece that money can't buy to where I really, more than ever in my life, I feel like my conscience is clear. Now I'm human and we all fly. Oh, I get that. But there's a sort of not only do I feel good that I haven't sold my soul of the soul of the podcast, there is part of me that I go, yeah, I'm proud of my report card of my soul. I could go talk to God right now and I'd be like, yeah, it'd be good to get 100, but I'll defend my 91. And that I think has been the foundation of more peace of mind than anything else in my life. Where I'm just like, I think I did the right thing even when no one was watching. And it really does kind of make you sleep better. It really does. You lay there and you go, I'm good. I'm proud. And I like that. So um we'll wrap it up with that. I have another show I have to jump to, but your book, Broken Whistle, I'll send you a text after my next show. Um I'm going to get your book. I'd love to have you on and talk about the book, and it'll be a little more structured. But I appreciate it today, man. That was fun, and I appreciate the time out of your day, and I appreciate your insight, dude. You're a cool
You're
guy.
welcome. It's a
Thank you very much.
pleasure.
Yes, sir. I will send you this when it is. It'll be up tomorrow, and I'll text you after my next show. And I'll grab your book. For everybody listening, the book is in the description as well as your website, all that good stuff. But dude, it was great chatting with you, and I look forward to the next one.
Thank you so much, Tommy.
Thank you so
Pleasure.
much. Yes, sir. God bless.